Hi, my name is Jonathan Emanuel Salinas Avila, and I'm from Tech Milenio Campus Cuernavaca, and I'm going to talk about the Cold War for this activity of contemporary world with help with this PowerPoint. Well, first of all, what is the Cold War, or what the term Cold War refers? This is a good question that we can ask to ourselves. Let's begin with a brief description of the Cold War. Well, the Cold War was a period from the end of the 40s to approximately 1990 in which there was a political confrontation between the two superpowers of that time. After the World War II, we have in one side the United States and in the other side the Soviet Socialist Republic. It is called cold because it was never an open and direct military conflict between the two countries. Actually, the world was feared about the nuclear weapons, but it was never a direct military conflict. But the point is that both countries played to know which nation was the strongest nation with more influence in the world or more powerful. The Cold War was an era of constant tension in the world because each nation fought for the supremacy. They established strategic military blocks that because they wanted to have more influence in the whole world. The interests of both nations and their opposite economic system led to a big conflict of violence and instability not only in both nations but also in the whole world, and many nations were affected because of this. An example is Vietnam or Korea. But how the Cold War began, or what about the history of the Cold War? Well, all began after the World War II, at the final of the war, around the final 40s. Actually, the United States and the Soviet Union were in the winner team. They won the war, but after winning, each country wanted to gain more territory, more power, more influence, and more supremacy to reaffirm their prestige and authority. Um, uh, we have here two countries, United States and Soviet Union, that began to form alliance with other countries to gain influence in the world and strength and power. For example, USA established alliances with in Europe with Great Britain, Italy, France, Spain, the Scandinavian countries, etc. In Latin America, for example, Mexico and Argentina, Colombia supported the United States, and in Asia, Japan, Australia, and Philippines. Actually, an important point to say is that in 1949, the United States signed the North Atlantic Treaty Organization Pact, known as the OTAN, with some of its allies. This was really important. On the other side, the Soviet Union found allies in Eastern Europe, such as Czechoslovakia, Romania, Poland, Bulgaria, Hungary. Also, the Soviet Union wanted to establish communist governments in some parts of the world, such as in Cuba, China, Ethiopia, Vietnam, Mozambique, and North Korea. With the alliances of the Soviet Union, the Warsaw Pact was formed in the communist bloc. But also an important point is that among the Cold War there were the proxy wars. The proxy wars were wars that actually were originated because of the Cold War, conflicts between nations that were on the side of the U.S. against those who were on the side of the Soviet Union. One of these wars was the Korean War from 1950 to 1953. As we know, Japan actually conquered the Korean Peninsula, but when Japan was defeated in the World War II, well, USA and the Soviet Union occupied the peninsula. So the peninsula now were divided. In the south, there was South Korea supported by the United States and North Korea supported by the Soviet Union. Actually, both part of Korea failed to reunite. There were conflicts in the political and economic system, so the war began and had a duration of 3 years. But at the final of a lot of violence, there was a tie. The Koreas firmed an armistice in 1953. The armistice was called Panmunjom, and that was the final armistice. Other proxy war was the Vietnam War. In the Vietnam War, actually, we know that Vietnam was a country that also was divided after the World War II into the southern capitalist part and the north part who was communist. In 1959, the conflict began and it was really violent and terrible, exceptionally terrible, with a high mortality rate. Finally, the south part, the capitalist part supported by the USA, was defeated, lost the war. So in 1975, the country reunified under a communist government supported and following the ideas of the Soviet Union. Also, one of the most critical moments in the Cold War was the missile crisis in Cuba, because in October 15, 1962, the United States know that the Soviet Union had installed military outposts armed with nuclear arms in the Cuba island. So that would be terrible for the United States. So the president of that time of USA, John F. Kennedy, immediately reacted to this, and he demanding the removal of these military weapons from Cuba. So some days later, the Soviet Union removed these installations, avoiding a bigger problem. But let's talk about the economic systems that emerged on that time. We need to remember that some countries supported the capitalism and other countries supported the socialism. So these economic systems were one fight for the supremacy, and there were conflicts because of these economic systems. First, we are going to talk about the capitalism. It's important to fully understand these both systems. But the capitalism is based on the production of goods and services with the purpose of obtaining wealth through the inversion of resources. Actually, in this economic system, there is a minimum government intervention. The government actually really don't intervene so much in the economic system. Adam Smith created the concept of capitalism, and John Locke established the principles that characterize this model. In the next slide, we are going to see these characteristics. Some of the characteristics of capitalism are the control and accumulation of resources or capital. That is the principal thing of capitalism. Also, there is a private domination in the production system. There is a market class division. We have the poor class, the middle class, the high class, and working class. The stratification of classes allows different functions in the system. Each class has a function. For example, workers, working class work, and the inversionists are those who of the money. And the production and distribution of goods and services are determined by a free market that produces benefits for the investors. Always the investors receive the benefits, and the prices are based on offer and demand. Here we have a little images in which the capitalism is explained. Here we have a man sitting under the tree, and that is an investor that saw the opportunity and is actually based on the offer and demand. Let's now talk about the socialism. Here on the socialism, we have this system in which the production and the properties are managed and administered by the collectivity or the government. Here in the socialism, the social classes are not really defined as in the capitalism. Henry de Saint-Simon was a precursor of the socialism ideas, but Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels also developed socialist ideas. Also, Karl Marx was the father of the scientific socialism. Marx wanted the abolition of the private property and the elimination of the social classes and the state control by the working class. There were the points of Marx. The main characteristics of socialism are these ones. The control of the production is in the hands of the state. The state actually controls all the production of goods and services, and there's a lot of intervention of the state. The private capital don't exist. The work for stay alive. You work for stay alive, don't for be rich. The possibility to you to be rich is really low because the social classes are static. The goods are for everyone, and that's why in the socialism the economic freedom doesn't exist. There is a control of the state. The production of goods and services are for the exchange, not for sale for get wealth. This is important to know. What countries were the world leaders during the Cold War?
Well, on this side, let's say on the American continent, it was the United States of America, and on the other side of the ocean, so to say, was the USSR, what is known as Russia now.
Okay. Why did countries who were allies during the wars become enemies afterwards?
Well, they got together, these countries. We are talking about on one side England, France, and Russia. They got together and they made an alliance because they had a common enemy, which was Germany. But once they overcame Germany, then they realized it was very obvious that the different ideologies were totally opposing.
Okay, of course. Where did the Cold War take place?
Well, it took place in several parts of the world. The first one was in Greece, but more evident was in Korea, right, in Vietnam, and obviously in Cuba.
Okay. What opinion did the general public have of the Cold War?
Well, everybody was afraid. Everybody. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that nobody really know what was going on. I mean, this was a serious business, and people were really concerned, especially in in Germany. Children were trained to to hide whenever they heard the alarm. They had these drills, so Germans were trained to survive a nuclear holocaust.
Okay. What type of weapons did the two world powers have at their disposal?
Well, exactly. It was obvious that after the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombing, the U.S. had nuclear weapons, and that was 1945. And soon enough, in 1949, Russia also developed their own atomic bomb. So they had nuclear weapons, atomic weapons, as well as chemical weapons.
Okay, thank you. Well, as a conclusion to close this little explanation about the Cold War and the capitalist and socialism economic systems, uh, from my point of view, I only want to share my opinion. Um, from my point of view, the Cold War was not what was only called for USA and the Soviet Union, but not was called for other countries such as Vietnam or Korea, uh, because these countries actually get into the war and they suffered the consequences of the armed conflicts. I think it's terrible and unfair that your country suffered a war because of the division of ideas among the followers of the USA and the capitalism and those who support the Soviet Union and the socialism. In my opinion, after the war, the countries didn't search. After the World War II, the countries actually didn't really search the peace. They searched their own personal objectives and benefits, their own prestige, their own power, their own goals. They do not search for their world goals and the world stability. Actually, each country wanted to be the best among all and have the authority. So, I mean, the countries could say that it doesn't matter what's going on with the other little countries, and this is a bad thinking. Talking about the two economic systems, in my opinion, is best the capitalism because here you need to work for life, and every person who wants to live needs to work. I know that the capitalism sometimes is oppressive, but I think it's because this system is not working as it needs to work. We need to create a society in which all we need to cooperate, we need to work to stay alive, but also to bring benefits to all the community, and that the wealthy could must be or should be divided according to the work or the that the person do, and that's all for now. Thank you so much for the attention, and that's all for today.